Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
I stopped feeling like I belonged. Have you ever looked around your own living room, watched your children laughing in the next room, heard your husband calling your name from the kitchen, and still felt a strange question quietly whisper inside your heart? Where is your true home? I never expected that question to shake my entire life. From the outside, my life looked exactly like the American dream people admire. I had a loving husband, beautiful children, friendly neighbors, a comfortable house, and peaceful weekends filled with backyard barbecues, soccer games, grocery shopping, and long walks under blue American skies. Everything looked complete. Everything looked successful. But one ordinary afternoon, something happened that made me realize I had been confusing a comfortable life with a true sense of belonging. That single moment changed the way I looked at my marriage, my family, my neighbors, my community, and even myself forever. If you have ever wondered whether happiness can quietly disappear without making any noise, or whether you can smile every day while secretly feeling disconnected, this story may surprise you. More importantly, it may answer a question you have never dared to ask yourself. My name is Emma, and this is the most personal story I have ever shared. It is not about becoming American. It is about finally feeling American. There is a very big difference. One Saturday morning started like hundreds before it. My husband was making pancakes, while our children argued about which cartoon to watch. The coffee smelled wonderful. The sunlight filled every corner of our kitchen. Outside, an elderly neighbor slowly watered her flowers while waving at everyone passing by. It looked like the kind of peaceful morning people imagine when they think about family life in the United States. Yet I remember standing quietly by the kitchen window, smiling at everyone, while feeling strangely invisible. Nothing was wrong, but something was missing. I simply could not explain what it was. Psychology researchers often describe this feeling as the difference between being physically present and emotionally connected. A person can have relationships, routines, and achievements while still feeling they have not truly arrived inside their own life. That description fit me perfectly, although I did not know it then. Later I learned that our brains naturally search for belonging because social connection is closely linked to emotional well-being. Feeling included lowers stress, improves resilience, and even helps people learn new skills more effectively. Perhaps that explains why, whenever I felt accepted, even speaking English became easier without me forcing myself. I was never trying to sound perfect. I simply wanted to feel comfortable enough to speak. Instead of memorizing difficult vocabulary, I started paying attention to ordinary conversations. Good morning. How are you today? Have a wonderful weekend. Those tiny expressions slowly became part of my daily life instead of classroom exercises. Surprisingly, confidence grew faster than vocabulary. Looking back now, I realize language was never my biggest challenge. Confidence was. That afternoon, everything changed because of a little girl no older than 7. She looked at me during a neighborhood event, smiled brightly, and asked a question so innocent that nobody else even noticed it. But her words stayed with me long after everyone had gone home. I won't tell you exactly what she asked just yet, because that single sentence became the turning point of this entire story, and understanding why it mattered will make much more sense after you see everything that happened next. What I can tell you is this. I drove home in complete silence that evening. My husband thought I was simply tired. My children fell asleep in the back seat. The streets were calm, the traffic lights glowed softly, and everything around me looked exactly the same. Yet inside my mind, nothing was the same anymore. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If home is not only the place where you sleep, then where is it? Is it where people know your name? Is it where your children grow up? Is it where love waits for you every evening? Or is home something much deeper that cannot be seen at all? I believed I already knew the answer. I was completely wrong. And discovering the real answer would transform not only my marriage and family life, but also the way I understood happiness, community, and even the simple act of saying, I finally felt American. My perfect life wasn't perfect. The little girl's question followed me everywhere. It stayed with me while I folded laundry, while I packed my children's lunches, while I smiled at neighbors, and even while I laughed at dinner with my family. The strange part was that nobody noticed anything had changed. My husband still kissed me goodbye every morning before work. My children still ran through the house, filling every room with noise and laughter. Every Sunday, we drove to the same local farmer's market, buying fresh fruit, homemade bread, and flowers that always made our kitchen brighter. If someone had taken a photograph of my life that week, they would have called it beautiful. They would have been right. But they would also have been completely wrong. That is one of the biggest secrets about happiness. Sometimes the hardest struggles are completely invisible. We often imagine that people lose themselves after dramatic events, but psychologists have found that emotional disconnection usually grows quietly through ordinary routines. Nothing explodes. Nothing falls apart. Instead, small unanswered questions slowly collect inside the mind until one day they become impossible to ignore. I did not realize I was living through that exact process. I simply believed I was tired. One evening, my husband looked at me across the dinner table and smiled. "You seem far away lately," he said softly. I answered exactly the way many people do. "I'm fine." It was the shortest lie I told all year. The truth was much more complicated. I loved my family deeply. I loved our peaceful neighborhood. I loved watching autumn leaves cover the sidewalks and spring flowers return after long winters. I loved hearing children play in nearby parks and watching families gather for community events. Yet I kept asking myself one uncomfortable question. Why did I still feel like I was standing outside a window, looking into my own life instead of living inside it? A few days later, I experienced something so ordinary that most people would have forgotten it within minutes. I walked into a small neighborhood coffee shop where the same barista greeted customers every morning. Before I could order, she smiled and said, "The usual today?" For a second, I simply stared at her. I had never realized she remembered me. She remembered my favorite drink, my name, and even asked how my children were doing at school. It was only a conversation lasting less than 2 minutes, yet it quietly broke something inside me. Or perhaps it repaired something. Scientists often explain that the human brain builds a sense of belonging through repeated positive social interactions rather than through one extraordinary event. Tiny moments of recognition activate feelings of safety and trust. That morning, I finally understood what those studies meant. Belonging was not hiding inside grand achievements. It was growing inside ordinary mornings that I had been too distracted to notice. As I walked home carrying my coffee, I paid attention to details I had ignored for years. A neighbor stopped to help an older man carry groceries across the street. 2 strangers held the door open for each other without saying much. Children riding bicycles shouted cheerful greetings to people they had never met before. None of these moments were spectacular, yet together they formed something incredibly powerful. They created a community where kindness happened naturally instead of dramatically. That evening I tried something different. Instead of rushing through another busy family dinner, I put my phone away before anyone else arrived at the table. I listened more carefully. I laughed more freely. My daughter told a funny story about school that made everyone laugh until tears filled our eyes. My son proudly explained a science project. My husband reached across the table and quietly held my hand without saying a single word. In that simple moment, I realized something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Feeling American had nothing to do with sounding perfect, dressing a certain way, or living inside a beautiful house. It had everything to do with participating instead of simply observing. Even my English began changing because I stopped worrying about mistakes and started caring more about connection. A simple good morning, a friendly "how was your weekend?" or a sincere thank you suddenly carried much more meaning than perfect grammar ever could. But just when I believed I had finally found the answer, something unexpected happened only 3 days later. It was a conversation with someone I had known for years, and one sentence from that conversation completely destroyed everything I thought I had finally understood. That was the moment I realized the little girl's question had been only the beginning of a much bigger journey.
One ordinary conversation changed everything. 3 days later, I heard a sentence that completely shattered the story I had been telling myself for years. It did not come from my husband. It did not come from my children. It did not come from a therapist or a motivational speaker. It came from my next-door neighbor while we were both standing beside 2 overflowing recycling bins on an ordinary Tuesday morning. If someone had filmed that moment, nobody would have clicked on the video because nothing dramatic was happening. Birds were singing. Cars passed slowly. A dog barked in the distance. Yet that ordinary conversation quietly changed the direction of my entire life. My neighbor smiled and said, "You always take care of everyone else. But who takes care of you?" I laughed for a second because I thought she was joking. Then I realized she wasn't smiling anymore. She was waiting for an answer. The silence that followed felt much louder than any argument I had ever experienced. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The truth was painfully simple. I did not know the answer. That afternoon, her question followed me home the same way the little girl's question had days earlier. I suddenly realized something that frightened me. I had spent years building a happy family, but somewhere along the way I had quietly stopped noticing the woman inside that family. Every morning I planned everyone's schedule before thinking about my own. I remembered every school activity, every grocery list, every birthday, every doctor's appointment, every family dinner, every holiday plan. Yet if someone had asked me one simple question, "What makes you feel alive?" I honestly would not have known what to say. Modern psychology calls this emotional self-neglect. It happens when caring for other people slowly becomes so automatic that we forget our own emotional needs. Ironically, the healthier a family looks from the outside, the easier it becomes to hide this silent exhaustion. That explanation hit me harder than I expected because it described my life almost perfectly. Nothing was broken. I simply had not been paying attention to myself anymore. That evening my husband noticed I was unusually quiet while we cleaned the kitchen together. Instead of pretending everything was fine, I finally told him the truth. "I think I've been confusing being busy with being happy." He stopped washing the dishes, dried his hands, and looked directly at me. Then he said something I will never forget. "I've been waiting for you to say that." His answer surprised me more than my own confession. He explained that he had noticed I smiled less than before, even during moments that used to make me laugh. He thought I was simply tired and didn't want to pressure me. For the first time in months, We talked without checking our phones, without rushing to finish chores, and without children interrupting every few minutes. We simply talked about dreams, about fears, about growing older, about raising children in today's America, about how easy it is to become roommates instead of partners if couples stop having honest conversations. Relationship researchers often explain that successful marriages are not built on avoiding problems. They are built on repairing emotional distance before it becomes emotional isolation. Looking back, I believe that conversation became our first real repair. It did not solve every problem overnight, but it reminded us that strong marriages are strengthened by small conversations repeated consistently, not by one perfect romantic moment. Something unexpected happened after that night. I became more curious about the people around me. Instead of assuming everyone else's life was easier, I started listening more carefully. A mother at my children's school admitted she also struggled to balance family and personal dreams. An elderly couple at the local park laughed about arguments they still had after 40 years of marriage. A cashier at the grocery store proudly told me she had just started college at 53 because she refused to believe it was too late. Every conversation revealed the same truth. Nobody had a perfect life. They simply kept choosing hope over perfection. Even my English practice quietly changed. Rather than worrying about flawless grammar, I focused on meaningful conversations. I asked simple questions. I listened carefully. I smiled more. I discovered that confidence grows faster through genuine connection than through memorizing complicated vocabulary lists. Then something happened that I never expected. One Friday evening, while cleaning an old hallway closet, I found a small box covered in dust. Inside was an object I had completely forgotten existed. The moment I held it in my hands, tears filled my eyes before I even realized why. That forgotten object carried a memory powerful enough to answer the little girl's question, my neighbor's question, and perhaps the biggest question of all. Where's your true home? The answer had been sitting inside my house all along, waiting patiently for me to be ready to see it. Marriage tested my heart. When I opened that dusty little box, I expected to find old family photos or forgotten holiday decorations. Instead, I found a folded note written in my own handwriting. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it because I honestly could not remember when I had written it. The paper was slightly yellow, the ink had faded, and one corner was bent as if someone had read it many times. As I unfolded it, my heart began beating faster. The first sentence stopped me completely. Promise yourself that no matter how busy life becomes, you will never stop being the woman you are today. I had written those words years ago. And somehow, I had broken that promise without even noticing. I sat on the floor of the hallway while the house remained unusually quiet. My children were finishing homework upstairs, my husband was still at work, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to remember the woman who had written that note. She laughed more easily. She dreamed without apologizing. She believed that marriage meant growing together instead of simply getting through another week. Somewhere between school schedules, grocery lists, mortgage payments, family calendars, and endless responsibilities, that version of me had quietly disappeared. The frightening part was that nothing dramatic had caused it. Life had simply become busy enough to distract me from myself. Experts who study long-term relationships often explain something called relationship autopilot. Couples do not suddenly fall apart. They slowly replace meaningful connection with efficient teamwork. Conversations become reminders. Hugs become routines. Even love begins sounding like logistics. Did you pay the bill? Can you pick up the kids? What's for dinner? None of those questions are wrong. But when they become the only conversations left, something precious quietly fades away. That realization frightened me because it described our marriage better than I wanted to admit. We still loved each other deeply. We respected each other. We worked hard for our family. But when was the last time we had looked at each other with genuine curiosity instead of simply discussing tomorrow's schedule? That evening I decided to do something completely unexpected. Instead of planning another ordinary Friday night at home, I asked my husband if he would take a walk with me after dinner while the children watched a movie. He looked surprised because I usually preferred staying home after a busy week. We walked through our neighborhood just as the sun was beginning to disappear behind rows of tall maple trees. Families were walking their dogs. Children laughed from nearby front yards. American flags moved gently in the evening breeze. Everything around us felt peaceful, yet my heart raced as if I were about to make a life-changing decision. Finally, I took a deep breath and asked him a question I had been afraid to say aloud. Do you think we've been living together? Or truly living with each other? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he smiled sadly, slipped his hand into mine, and said something that caught me completely off guard. I was hoping you would ask me that before I forgot how. Those words hit me harder than any argument ever could. We kept walking, talking more honestly than we had in years. We admitted that neither of us wanted a perfect marriage. We wanted a real one. One where we could still surprise each other, still laugh at silly mistakes, still dream about the future instead of only surviving the present. Researchers have found that couples who regularly share new experiences together strengthen emotional bonds because the brain naturally connects novelty with positive feelings. We decided our marriage did not need expensive vacations or dramatic changes. It simply needed intentional moments. So we created one small habit. Every Saturday morning, before checking phones, before starting chores, before the children woke up, we sat together with coffee for just 20 uninterrupted minutes. Sometimes we talked about serious things. Sometimes we laughed about ridiculous memories. Sometimes we simply enjoyed the silence. Those 20 minutes quietly became the strongest part of our entire week. They reminded us that love grows through attention, not perfection. Something else changed too. I stopped trying to sound impressive whenever I spoke English with neighbors or other parents. I focused instead on being present. A simple conversation about the weather often became a conversation about family. A quick greeting at school sometimes turned into a meaningful friendship. I realized people rarely remember perfect grammar, but they almost always remember genuine kindness. Slowly, the feeling that had haunted me for weeks began to fade. I no longer felt like someone watching life through a window. I was finally stepping inside it. But just when I believed our family had found a new rhythm, an unexpected moment involving my daughter would reveal a truth so simple and so powerful that it would completely redefine what the word home actually meant to me. My children saw what I couldn't. The lesson that changed my life did not come from a book, a therapist, or years of experience. It came from my 8-year-old daughter with pain on her hands and complete confidence in her voice. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon after school when she rushed into the house carrying a colorful poster almost as big as she was. "Mom, you have to see this," she shouted before I even had time to close the front door. She spread the poster across our kitchen table, smiling as if she had just won the biggest prize in the world. At the top, written in bright blue letters, were the words, "My home." I expected to see a drawing of our house, maybe our family dog, or the tree in our front yard. Instead, I saw something that made me freeze. She had drawn our entire family standing together beneath a wide American sky, but there was something unusual about the picture. Every person was connected by one long red string that stretched from one heart to another. There was no fence around the house. There were no walls separating anyone. Even our neighbors were standing nearby, smiling. "Why did you draw the red string?" I asked quietly. She looked at me as if the answer were obvious. "Because home isn't the house," she said. "Home is the people who never let go of you." For several seconds, I could not speak. Children have an incredible ability to simplify truths that adults spend years trying to understand. While I had been searching for a feeling, she had already been living it. She did not care about appearances, achievements, or whether everything looked perfect. She measured home by connection. That simple drawing completely transformed the way I looked at our daily life. Developmental psychologists often explain that children build their emotional security not from expensive experiences, but from predictable love, shared attention, and consistent family routines. They remember bedtime stories more than expensive gifts. They remember laughter around the dinner table more than perfectly decorated houses. Looking back, I realized my children had been teaching me this lesson every single day. I simply had not been listening carefully enough. That evening, instead of rushing through another busy schedule, I suggested something unusual. We turned off the television, placed every phone in a kitchen drawer, and decided to play a simple board game together. Nobody expected it to become one of our happiest family memories. We laughed at silly mistakes, celebrated tiny victories, and joked about who was secretly changing the rules. At one point, my son laughed so hard that he accidentally knocked over the game pieces, and instead of becoming frustrated, everyone burst into even louder laughter. I looked around the room and suddenly realized something almost unbelievable. This was the feeling I had been searching for. Not excitement. Not perfection. Not success. Presence. I was no longer watching my family from a distance while thinking about tomorrow's responsibilities. I was completely there, living inside the moment. Researchers studying happiness consistently find that shared experiences create stronger long-term memories than material possessions. Our brains remember emotional connection far more vividly than objects. That explains why, months later, none of us could remember who actually won the game that night, but every one of us remembered how happy we felt. The following weekend, we visited a nearby community park where families gathered for a local festival. Children ran through open fields, musicians played cheerful songs, and volunteers welcomed everyone with warm smiles. As we sat together eating simple picnic food, my daughter quietly leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, I like it here." I smiled and asked, "Because of the festival?" She shook her head. "No," she answered softly. "Because we're together." Those 3 words stayed with me long after the music ended. I finally understood that feeling American was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about participating in the kindness, openness, and community that surrounded us every day. It was about saying hello to neighbors, helping someone carry groceries, volunteering at school, sharing meals with family, and appreciating the ordinary moments that quietly build extraordinary lives. Even my English practice became more natural because I stopped treating it like a test. I simply used it to connect with people. A friendly, "How's your day going?" or "Have a great weekend" carried more meaning than perfect pronunciation ever could. Confidence was no longer something I chased. It became a natural result of feeling comfortable in my own life. But just when I believed my children had already taught me the greatest lesson I would ever learn, an unexpected change in the seasons was about to reveal one final truth. Nature itself would show me why so many people misunderstand life in America, and why sometimes the quietest seasons produce the strongest hearts. The American life nobody warned me about. The biggest surprise about life in America was not something I saw. It was something I felt. Nobody warned me that one quiet autumn morning could teach me more about belonging than 1,000 inspirational books ever could. The trees outside our street had turned brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. Leaves floated gently across the sidewalks while children laughed on their way to school. It looked exactly like the beautiful pictures people post online every fall. But if you had looked a little closer, you would have noticed something far more interesting than the colorful trees. Every neighbor seemed to have a rake in one hand and a smile in the other. One family was cleaning not only their own yard, but also helping an elderly couple next door. Another neighbor stopped his morning jog just to help someone lift a heavy package from their car. Nobody was filming it. Nobody expected applause. They simply helped because that was what neighbors did. Standing there with a warm cup of coffee, I suddenly realized something that completely changed the way I understood American life. The strongest communities are built through ordinary kindness repeated over and over again. Not through dramatic acts. Not through perfect people. Just small decisions made every day. That afternoon, I joined several neighbors who were preparing the community park for a weekend event. Honestly, I almost stayed home. My excuse was simple. I was busy. The laundry wasn't finished. Dinner still needed planning. Emails were waiting. But something inside me whispered that life had already stolen enough ordinary moments from me. So I went. At first I felt awkward, wondering whether I truly belonged there. Then a woman I had only met twice handed me a pair of gardening gloves and smiled. "We're glad you're here." For simple words. Yet they carried more warmth than I expected. Researchers studying community well-being often explain that people experience greater happiness when they contribute to something larger than themselves. Volunteering, helping neighbors, and participating in local activities strengthen not only social connections, but also emotional resilience. Scientists even suggest these simple interactions can reduce stress hormones while increasing feelings of purpose. As I worked beside complete strangers, I understood exactly why. Nobody cared whether I spoke perfect English. Nobody judged my accent. Nobody asked me to prove anything. They appreciated my willingness to help. That was enough. Later that evening, our neighborhood gathered for the small community celebration we had spent the afternoon preparing. Children chased bubbles across the grass, while local musicians played cheerful songs. Families shared homemade food from different cultures, creating one long table filled with flavors, traditions, and stories. Looking around, I noticed something beautiful. Everyone was different, yet nobody seemed interested in making those differences disappear. Instead, people celebrated them. That was another lesson life quietly taught me. Real belonging does not require becoming exactly like everyone else. It simply asks you to show up with kindness, respect, and an open heart. During the event, an elderly gentleman sitting beside me pointed toward the children running across the park. "That's what keeps a neighborhood alive," he said. I smiled, expecting him to mean the children themselves. But he shook his head. "No," he continued. "Parents who know each other's names." I thought about that sentence all the way home. It sounded so simple, yet it explained something many people overlook about living in the United States. A neighborhood becomes stronger not because of beautiful houses, but because people choose to build trust one conversation at a time. That night, our family started another small tradition. Every Sunday evening after dinner, instead of everyone disappearing into separate rooms, we took a slow walk together around the neighborhood. Sometimes we talked about school. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about absolutely nothing. We greeted neighbors walking their dogs, waved to children riding bicycles, and stopped whenever someone wanted to chat. These walks became much more than exercise. They quietly reminded us that home extended beyond our front door. Even my English improved naturally because every walk brought small conversations. Beautiful weather today. Your garden looks amazing. Have a wonderful week. I discovered something surprising. Fluency grows faster when conversations are connected to real life instead of fear. Confidence is built sentence by sentence, smile by smile, greeting by greeting. Looking back now, I believe many people misunderstand America because they focus only on headlines, politics, or stereotypes. They miss the everyday moments where communities quietly care for one another. They overlook the neighbors who shovel snow for an elderly couple before sunrise, the parents who volunteer at school after long workdays, the strangers who hold doors open without expecting thanks. Those moments rarely become news, yet they shape daily life more than most people realize. As winter slowly approached and the colorful leaves finally disappeared, I believed I had already learned the most important lesson of my journey. I was wrong. Because one cold December evening, while standing beneath thousands of holiday lights with my family beside me, I would experience a moment so unexpected that it would finally answer the question that had followed me since the beginning of this story. Where is your true home? The answer was waiting only a few steps ahead, and this time, I was finally ready to hear it. Tiny English, bigger confidence. The moment I finally stopped being afraid of English did not happen inside a classroom. It did not happen after finishing a thick grammar book or memorizing hundreds of new words. It happened because of one sentence that I almost didn't say. Ironically, that sentence was only 4 words long. Looking back, I still smile because I had spent years believing confidence came after fluency, when the truth was exactly the opposite. Confidence came first. Fluency simply followed. The turning point arrived a few days before Christmas, while our neighborhood prepared for its annual holiday lighting celebration. Families decorated their front yards with sparkling lights. Children carried hot chocolate while wearing oversized winter hats. And cheerful music floated through the cold evening air. It felt like one of those moments that people remember for years without realizing it at the time. I was helping arrange cookies and warm drinks at a small community table when a woman I had seen many times before walked toward me with a friendly smile. Normally, I would have waited for her to speak first because I was still worried about saying something incorrectly. But this time, before fear had a chance to interrupt me, I smiled and simply said, "I'm glad you're here." That was all. 4 ordinary words. She smiled even wider and replied, "I'm glad you're here too." Then we spent nearly 20 minutes talking about our families, holiday traditions, favorite winter recipes, and our children. Something incredible happened during that conversation. I forgot to be nervous. I forgot to count my mistakes. I forgot to wonder whether my grammar sounded perfect. My attention moved away from myself and toward the other person. Communication researchers often explain that the human brain becomes more fluent when attention shifts from performance to connection. Anxiety consumes mental energy that language production needs. But when people focus on sharing ideas instead of avoiding mistakes, speech naturally becomes smoother. Without realizing it, I had accidentally discovered the same principle. The biggest obstacle had never been English itself. It had been my fear of making English imperfect. From that day forward, I created a tiny habit that quietly transformed my confidence. Every single day, I promised myself I would start one genuine conversation with someone. Sometimes it lasted only 30 seconds. Sometimes 5 minutes. Sometimes it was nothing more than smiling at a cashier and saying, "How has your day been?" Other days I complimented someone's beautiful garden or wished a neighbor a wonderful weekend. These conversations seemed too small to matter, yet psychologists describe this process as gradual exposure. Small, repeated successes teach the brain that a situation is safe, reducing anxiety over time. Instead of trying to become fearless overnight, I became just a little braver every day. That tiny difference changed everything. My children noticed the change before I did. One afternoon, my son looked at me while we were shopping and casually said, "Mom, you smile more when you talk to people now." I laughed because I realized he was right. Months earlier, every conversation felt like a test. Now it felt like an opportunity. My husband noticed it too. One evening he said, "You sound different." I asked whether my English had improved. He shook his head and smiled. "No," he answered. "You sound happier." His words stayed with me because they revealed something deeper than language. People often hear confidence before they hear vocabulary. They notice warmth before perfection. They remember kindness long after they forget exact sentences. Around that time, I also began reading simple English stories aloud for 15 minutes every evening. Not because I wanted to sound like a news reporter, but because I wanted English to feel natural inside my own home. Sometimes my daughter listened while coloring. Sometimes my husband smiled from the couch as I stumbled over a difficult word and laughed at myself. Surprisingly, those imperfect moments became some of my favorite family memories. Research on language learning consistently shows that reading aloud improves pronunciation, listening awareness, speaking rhythm, and long-term memory, especially when learners choose material they genuinely enjoy instead of forcing themselves through complicated texts. That discovery completely changed my routine. English stopped feeling like homework. It became part of our family life. It became another way to connect instead of another reason to feel pressure. Looking back, I wish someone had told me years earlier that fluency is not built by chasing perfection. It is built by collecting thousands of tiny moments of courage. One greeting, one smile, one conversation, one story at a time. By the end of December, something remarkable had happened. I no longer wondered whether I sounded American enough. Instead, I cared whether I sounded kind, sincere, and present. That quiet shift changed not only the way I spoke, but also the way I lived. Yet the greatest surprise was still waiting for me. On New Year's Eve, surrounded by my family and neighbors as fireworks illuminated the winter sky, someone would ask me a question that brought this entire journey full circle. This time, however, I already knew the answer. And saying it aloud would change me forever. The day I finally felt American. The question I had been chasing for months finally returned on the coldest night of the year. But this time, it did not frighten me. It found me standing in the middle of our neighborhood park on New Year's Eve, surrounded by families wrapped in thick winter coats, children waving glowing light sticks, and friends counting down the final minutes before midnight. The air was freezing, yet nobody seemed eager to leave. Hot chocolate steamed from paper cups. Laughter echoed across the park. Fireworks waited silently in the distance, ready to light up the sky. Everything felt beautifully ordinary. Then someone walked up beside me and asked a question that instantly transported me back to the beginning of this journey. "So, where do you feel most at home now?" A few months earlier, I would have hesitated. I would have searched for the perfect answer. This time, I smiled before speaking because I already knew the truth. "Right here," I replied softly. "Not because this place is perfect. Because the people here have become part of my life." As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized something extraordinary had happened. I was no longer trying to convince myself that I belonged. I simply did. Not because someone had given me permission. Not because I had changed who I was. But because I had stopped measuring belonging by appearances and started measuring it by relationships. At that exact moment, my husband quietly slipped his hand into mine. My daughter pointed excitedly toward the sky as the first fireworks exploded into brilliant colors. My son laughed while trying to catch tiny snowflakes on his gloves. Around us, neighbors hugged one another, wished each other a happy new year, and shared smiles with complete strangers. Nobody asked where anyone came from. Nobody cared about perfect accents or impressive careers. For those few magical minutes, everyone was simply celebrating another chance to begin again. Positive psychology researchers often describe belonging as one of the strongest predictors of long-term happiness. People who feel connected to family, friends, and community generally experience greater resilience, lower stress, and a stronger sense of purpose. Standing there beneath the fireworks, I finally understood why. Belonging is not something you discover in one dramatic moment. It quietly grows through hundreds of ordinary moments that almost seem too small to notice until one day they become your entire life. I looked around the park and remembered everything that had brought me to this point. The little girl who unknowingly planted the first question in my heart. My neighbor who gently asked who was taking care of me. The handwritten note I had forgotten inside a dusty box. The long evening walks with my husband. My daughter's drawing of the red string connecting our family. The simple conversations with neighbors. The tiny English phrases that gradually replaced fear with confidence. None of those moments seemed extraordinary when they happened. Yet together they built something stronger than certainty. They built trust. They built gratitude. They built home. What surprised me most was how naturally English had become part of that journey. I had never forced myself to sound perfect. Instead, I learned to speak while living. Every friendly greeting, every conversation at the grocery store, every school event. Every neighborhood gathering quietly became another English lesson without feeling like one. Language was no longer the destination. It had become the bridge connecting me to people I genuinely cared about. Researchers who study language acquisition often emphasize that meaningful interaction produces stronger learning than isolated memorization because emotions help the brain store information more effectively. Looking back, that explained everything. I remembered conversations because I remembered people. I remembered words because they carried real emotions. The countdown reached its final seconds. 10, 9, 8. Everyone around me joined together, their voices blending into one joyful chorus. As midnight arrived, fireworks illuminated the winter sky with dazzling colors. For a brief moment, thousands of tiny lights reflected in the eyes of my husband, my children, and every smiling face around us. I closed my eyes and took one slow breath. The question that had followed me for so long no longer needed an answer. It had become my answer. Home was not a location on a map. Home was the place where love was shared freely, where kindness was ordinary, where family laughed together after difficult days, where neighbors remembered your name, and where you could simply be yourself without pretending. That was the night I finally understood the meaning behind the title of my own story. I did not finally feel American because everything around me had changed. I finally felt American because something inside me had changed. And just when I believed the journey was complete, one final conversation the very next morning would reveal an even deeper truth, one that I now hope every person watching this story will carry into their own life forever. Where is your true home? The most important conversation of my entire journey happened the morning after New Year's Eve. There were no fireworks, no crowds, no dramatic music playing in the background. In fact, the moment was so ordinary that most people would have forgotten it within hours. Yet I believe it revealed the real answer to the question that had quietly guided every chapter of this story. The next morning, while the rest of my family was still asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen watching the first light of the new year slowly brighten the neighborhood outside. The streets were peaceful. Snow covered the lawns like a soft white blanket. The world felt unusually still, as if everything had paused for a moment before beginning again. I wrapped both hands around a warm cup of coffee and found myself thinking about the question that had started everything. Where is your true home? For months, I had searched for an answer in different places. I looked for it in routines, in family traditions, in community events, in conversations, in seasons, and even in my efforts to become more confident speaking English. Yet the answer had never fully arrived. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend. We had not spoken in quite some time. After exchanging New Year greetings, she asked a simple question. Do you ever miss the version of yourself from years ago? I stared at the screen for a long moment. It was a surprisingly difficult question. The honest answer was yes. There were parts of my younger self I missed. I missed her courage. I missed her curiosity. I missed the way she believed every new chapter would automatically lead to happiness. But there was also something she did not have. She did not have the wisdom that comes from building a family. She did not have years of lessons learned through mistakes. She did not yet understand that belonging is not something you find. It is something you create. That realization hit me with unexpected force. For so long, I had treated home as if it were a destination waiting somewhere ahead. I imagined that one day I would wake up and magically feel complete. But life rarely works that way. Researchers who study life satisfaction consistently find that meaning is built through relationships, purpose, and contribution rather than through achievement alone. In other words, happiness is often less about arriving and more about participating. Looking back, I could finally see how that principle had shaped my entire experience. Every meaningful moment had involved connection. The coffee shop employee who remembered my name. The neighbor who asked if I was taking care of myself. The community volunteers preparing a local event. My husband holding my hand during an evening walk. My daughter drawing a red string between every family member. None of those moments changed my address. Yet every one of them changed my heart. Later that afternoon, our family took one of our usual Sunday walks through the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Families carried groceries into their homes. A few neighbors stopped to chat for a minute before continuing their day. Everything seemed ordinary, yet I noticed something I would have overlooked months earlier. People were creating home all around me without realizing it. Every friendly wave. Every shared conversation. Every act of kindness. Every moment of patience. They were building belonging one interaction at a time. That is something many people misunderstand about life in America. They often focus on big opportunities, major achievements, or dramatic success stories. Those things matter. But the deeper story is usually found in smaller moments. The teacher who stays after school to help the student. The neighbor who checks on an elderly resident during winter. The parent who volunteers at a local event after a long workday. The stranger who holds a door open and offers a genuine smile. Those moments rarely appear in headlines, yet they shape daily life more than most people realize. They also taught me something important about confidence. Whether learning English or building a new chapter of life, progress often comes from tiny actions repeated consistently. One conversation. One friendship. One brave moment. One kind gesture. Over time, those small actions create a completely different future. As the sun began setting that evening, my daughter suddenly asked a question from the back seat of our car. Mom, if we move someday, will this still be our home? I smiled because, for the first time, I knew exactly how to answer. Yes, I said softly. Because home is not only where you live. Home is where love continues to live inside you. She smiled and looked out the window, satisfied with the answer. But as I drove home, I realized that her question had prepared me for the final lesson of this journey. The answer to where is your true home was no longer a mystery. Yet there was one final truth I needed to share, one truth powerful enough to tie together every challenge, every lesson, every conversation, and every moment that led me to finally feel American. I finally found my answer. If someone asked me today what the biggest surprise of my life has been, I would not talk about success, beautiful places, or even the happiest family memories. I would tell them about one simple realization that quietly changed everything. The answer I had been searching for was never waiting at the end of my journey. It had been walking beside me every single day, hidden inside ordinary moments that I almost ignored. For months, I believed I was searching for a place where I would finally feel complete. Instead, I discovered that I was learning how to become the kind of person who could recognize home wherever love, kindness, and genuine connection existed. That realization did not arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. It arrived one quiet evening while our family sat together on the front porch, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the trees. My husband was reading a book. My son was tossing a baseball into the air. My daughter rested her head on my shoulder while talking about her dreams for the future. The neighborhood was peaceful. Someone nearby was walking their dog. Children laughed in the distance. A gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass through the air. Suddenly, without planning to say anything, I whispered to myself, "I'm home." No one heard me. No one needed to. For the first time in years, those words felt completely true. I was no longer asking whether I belonged. I was living as though I already did. Looking back, I realized that every challenge had quietly prepared me for this moment. The little girl's innocent question had awakened something inside me. My caring neighbor reminded me that taking care of myself was not selfish. The handwritten promise inside the dusty box reminded me not to lose the woman I used to be. Honest conversations with my husband rebuilt a deeper friendship inside our marriage. My children taught me that home is measured by love, not walls. My neighbors showed me that communities become strong through everyday kindness rather than extraordinary events. Even my small journey with English revealed an unexpected truth. Every simple conversation became less about perfect grammar and more about genuine connection. I stopped trying to impress people. I simply wanted to understand them and let them understand me. Educational psychologists often explain that language grows most naturally when learners associate it with positive emotions instead of fear. Looking back now, I understand exactly why my confidence finally grew. Every smile, every greeting, every short conversation, every story I shared slowly replaced anxiety with trust. English became part of my life instead of becoming another obstacle inside it. If you are watching this because you sometimes feel lost, disconnected, or uncertain about where you belong, I hope my story gives you something more valuable than motivation. I hope it gives you permission to stop chasing perfection. Life rarely changes because of one giant breakthrough. More often, it changes because we begin noticing the ordinary blessings that have quietly surrounded us all along. Perhaps your home is already closer than you think. Perhaps it is waiting around tonight's dinner table. Perhaps it is hidden inside a conversation you have been postponing. Perhaps it is growing every time you choose kindness instead of fear, curiosity instead of judgment, gratitude instead of comparison. Even if your English is not perfect, keep speaking. Even if life feels confusing, keep showing up. Even if your confidence feels small today, protect it anyway, because confidence grows exactly the way trees do. Quietly. Patiently. One season at a time. There is one final lesson I want to leave with you. Feeling American was never the destination of my story. It became the result of building a meaningful life filled with respect, responsibility, compassion, family, and community. That is something no document, no accent, no achievement, and no title can ever give or take away. Real belonging begins the moment you stop asking whether you deserve a place and start helping make that place better for someone else. That single decision changes everything. So if you remember only one sentence from this entire story, let it be this. Your true home is not the place that asks you to become someone else. Your true home is the place where your love, your kindness, and your authentic self are free to grow every single day. And that is the day I finally understood the answer to the question that had followed me from the very beginning. I finally felt American, not because I changed where I lived, but because I changed how I lived. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If my story encouraged you, helped you practice English, or simply reminded you to appreciate the people beside you today, then perhaps this story has already become part of your own journey too. That's all for today. I'll create many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next one.